Hi, this is Misha, and today's video is on perhaps really the most famous and successful submachine gun after World War II. Of course, the Israeli IMI, now today IWI Uzi. Now, we've done several videos in the past on the Uzi, but never really just a comprehensive history. We've done looking at various guns and whatnot. So to represent the military guns, of course I don't have those, I have the select fire variants, but these are all Israeli made, so they should work. We've got an original IMI Model A. It's sporting the classic wood buttstock here. And no, this is not an SBR, this is a display barrel. So it replicates the look of a 10-inch. We also have an IMI pre-ban mini carbine. Again, with a display barrel to replicate the look of the 7.8 or so barrel these came with. The display barrels the minis originally came with were the longer style. They just did one style. So I had one custom made with the vents and everything, because why not? It gives it the right look. If you're going to do a display barrel, make it display right. So this represents the mini, mostly because it is a mini. And finally, the most recent member of the family, and you've seen this little guy in quite a few videos. It's been one of our surprise successes. This is the Uzi Pro, currently available. This does have the real barrel on it, although it's an aftermarket with the ports again. So it gives it the replicated look of just under 5 inches. This is a brace on it, but it does fold, and it's pretty similar to the military stock. And this is the modern take on the original micro Uzi from the 80s, which really was an evolution of the Semi-Auto Uzi Pistol. It's kind of an interesting story we'll get to in a bit. So we have the 3 general size classes, and we have a little bit of time span here. But before we get to that, the Uzi Pro in modern day, what about the original? As I said, this is the Model A. This was the first version of the semi-auto to come into the United States back in the early 80s. And it is a very close version of the original military. So, the Uzi submachine gun. Where do we get started? Well, we have to go all the way back to before World War II in the 1930s. Now, I don't want to get into politics. I know there's a lot of opinions, and I respect all that, and no reason to get into it now. But let's just say in the 1930s, that area, then known as Palestine, was under the control of the British, and you had both Arab and Hebrew nationals fighting for control. And so there was a lot of underground fighting, really all of it illegal, because it was against the wishes of the then government, the British. These groups would use whatever guns they could get their hands on. And of course, World War II would kick off, and Britain was no longer able to really govern Palestine, and we have warfare, of course, through Egypt and up through Turkey and everything. So things became very chaotic in the 40s, and the fighting continued, and a lot of guns from World War II crept into the Middle East. Notably, the British Sten gun. The Israelis would use it. However, they didn't really much care for it, which is really ironic because they even made them and repaired them in a lot of small machine shops and underground workshops and sometimes just straight up garages. And this really led to a lot of the problems they were experiencing with the Sten. But the Sten itself was a wartime expedient design done by the British. It was just as simple as they could make a gun. And the Israelis quickly found that it wasn't terribly safe. If you dropped it, it could go off because it was an open bolt. Its design was not terribly reliable, especially in the sand and the open desert. And of course, they realized very quickly its magazines sucked. I mean, really the weakest point of the Sten is perhaps its magazines. That double column single feed design dating back all the way to the MP28, and really even you could say the MP18, was alright for being the first submachine gun type mag, but it was quickly dated. Ironically, lots of people continued to use it for a long time though. And of course, as they repaired or even built their own Stens from parts, there was a lot of substandard parts going around in Stens, and they just had a really bleh reputation. Now, other submachine guns did come into that area. The German MP40s especially came in after the end of World War II, because there was a tremendous amount of fighting in the 45 to 49 time frame. We actually talked quite a bit about this in our video on the Israeli K98 Mauser. So if you're interested in that, check that out. Other guns that crept in, Thompsons of course, because they pretty much went everywhere in the world. And of course the M3 grease gun. So 9mm and 45 being the most common. There were some other guns that came around, such as the Soviet PPS H41 and PPS 43, but they weren't as popular just because of being in the 7.62 Tokarev cartridge, which was just not as common in that region. Well, in 1948, the nascent IDF, the new Israel, wanted a submachine gun. It needed one. It made sense for some desert fighting. It made sense for urban combat and close range combat, which they were participating in. It also made sense for mechanized units, which they were a big fan of, because yeah, marching across the desert is not especially a fantastic idea for many reasons. So they shopped around. They looked around the international market after World War II, and pretty much all they found were the guns they already had, because at that time there was not a lot of development in submachine guns. There was the Swedish K, of course. The French had not quite come out with the MAP 49 yet. Yeah, so mostly what was around following World War II was just older designs from that war, even before. And most of those Israel had already tried out and found wanting. So they made their own. Beginning in a short time later, definitely by 1950, we have two Israeli IDF officers working on submachine gun designs. Captain Uzi Gao, who obviously developed this one, and Major Kara. Now, you can probably guess what the IDF wanted. They wanted to go with 9mm. It was a kind of a universal round where they had lots of it compared to other pistol calibers. But more importantly, it needed to be easy to mass produce. Again, Israel at that time really hadn't formed any kind of small arms industry, at least not officially. It had to be cost effective to mass produce. You can make it in large numbers too. But of course, above all, it had to be durable, reliable, and safe. They learned their lesson with the Sten gun. They wanted this new gun. If they were going to go to the trouble to design a submachine gun, they wanted that thing to be as safe as humanly possible. I know by today's standards it's a little funny to think of the Uzi as a super safe gun, but it was really kind of the Glock of its day, in the sense that it had multiple safeties all working together, whereas the Sten virtually had none. So obviously Gao, the Uzi, won. But let's not, before we move on there, the Kara design was not bad at all. It was very easy to field strip. It used a very conventional round receiver, much like many submachine guns of that era. It was more of a conventional design, but it was a good submachine gun and probably could have been developed into even better. But it just didn't match up to the Uzi. Both experienced failures in harsh desert testing. There was not anything that would go through the desert without failing at all. I mean, even bolt actions fail in the harshest weather there. But the Uzi had far fewer stoppages and other malfunctions. It used very, very good magazines, and it had a lot of very advanced features for its day and time. It was also built soldier-proof, or at least as near as possible, and it was very easy to mass produce because it used very modern styling and techniques. So while the Kara was good, the Uzi was gooder. Trials took place in 1951, and by 52 the Uzi was declared the winner, although it was almost a foregone conclusion even before that. It was adopted into the IDF and first started to be issued in very limited numbers by 1954. So what do we have here? What makes this special? Now keep in mind I have a semi-auto, so we are what we are. Also keep in mind that submachine guns were quite a bit heavier and larger back in that day. Cast your gaze back to the MP40, the PPS H41, and of course the Thompson and the Suomi, which were pigs. We had a 10-inch barrel as standard, which is a good barrel length for a 9mm. That's getting out towards the edge. That should give us pretty good range and accuracy for longer range fighting. It is quick removable with a nut here, which is nice. Just unscrews and pulls off, very easy to do. We were even given, take it off here, a bayonet for close-in fighting, so if we did jam, we at least had something to work with, which is pretty nice. The bayonet lug especially is patterned off the Mauser. Come on, guy. There we go. Boop. Last resort, but it gives you something for CQB. It's a short little blade, but it's pretty sharp for a bayonet. Standard two-piece polymer handguard. We have an adjustable post front sight that's protected. We have a flip two-position rear sight, also protected. We have a top cocking action, which has the benefit of being ambidextrous. Of course, originally we would be firing from a an open bolt, which is pretty standard for most submachine guns then, and even still to some extent today. The original gun would have been select fire, safe, semi, full here. The semi-auto, of course, doesn't go all the way forward. You have safe and semi, it would go further forward for full. And we had some pretty innovative features, such as the bolt wrapping around the end of the barrel. So this allowed, even though this barrel doesn't look it, 10 inches, it comes all the way back here with a lot of the bolt mass forward. This was done so it could reliably cycle as a direct blowback gun. Some attribute this to the Czech VZ23-25 series, which was first introduced in 1948-49. This is possible, although Uzi Gal says it wasn't. He says he came up with the design on his own. And since the Uzi was in early production then, it's possible that the Czech design would have gotten to him, but they were not really in full production themselves until the 50s. So he says he didn't directly borrow from the VZ23. He was known to be a pretty honest fellow, so no reason to doubt him. It's a very logical move in the submachine gun, and he did credit other designs. For example, the magazines that made this so reliable are pretty much a copy of what Beretta made for the MAB 38 series. They're a double stack, double feed pattern. This added, of course, reliability, and also made it easy to load and unload. As you see, it goes straight into the grip with an easy to reach catch there. Sorry, my sling's there, guys. This is the hand finds hand that is often talked about. But it's a good idea. It does make the grip a little wider, so it depends on the size of your hand. Other safety features, in addition to the manual, we have a grip safety back here. Pretty common. And on the military gun, we would have a ratcheting top cover, which would not allow this to go forward until it was all the way back. So we had it couldn't just be bumped and then bounce forward. If it was bumped, it would catch on one of the teeth of the ratchet and not go back forward, thus preventing any kind of slam fire runaway. So we've got 3 pretty effective and very independently operating safety systems on this. Not at all bad for this day and time. Original magazines would hold 25 rounds as standard. Other capacities would come later. We'll get into those. Originally, the butt stock would be wood, such as this, but this is a Type 4 wood stock. The original Type 1 would have a more flat type butt plate with a small hole in it for a cleaning kit. Type 2s and Type 3s would be different lengths. They would go kind of long and then they would go a little bit shorter. And then with the Type 4, they would go to the cupped butt plate and they would take out the cleaning kit. They would also go to a detachable style with a little lever on the back, or the bottom, excuse me, here. They would do a fixed optional version of this as well. So the early guns would be like this. You could pull the stock off for storage. This is very a la Thompson. If you know the 1928 series Thompsons would feature the QD stock as well. Now the later military M1s would not. So that was their method early on for that. These would have a phosphate type finish, parkerizing, and would be in large scale production. It started to be issued and really seen in the IDF by the Suez Crisis. And they would just really go into service and be very, very well accepted. It gave Israel a very dependable submachine gun. It was also the first gun to be designed and produced domestically in Israel, which gave them a point of national pride and a little bit of unity. And it gave their military a very flexible weapon. This is a very robust gun to the point it can even be used in a pinch as a front line weapon, which they found out during such events as the 6 Days War. It wasn't ideal because of being 9mm, but you know, it was better than nothing, and it was a machine gun. There were even attempts by some of the military to put a longer barrel in here to get a little more range. So these are quite popular in Israel, and the IDF would continue to purchase them through the 60s and into the 70s. In 1967, they would introduce the now classic underfolding metal stock. I've got one, but you've got to do a little screwdrivering to swap them around, so we'll put up a picture. You guys know what it is. I figured the wood would be more interesting. So the now kind of classic stock came about in the late 60s. And later on, IMI in the 70s would go to this paint over phosphate type finish. And there'd be a few other minor changes, but that's pretty much it, honestly. They would also introduce a longer 32 round magazine. On this gun here, you actually see an Israeli IDF sling. It's pretty much the same as a standard sling, but it has this shoulder pad. Kind of neat. Numeric had these a few years ago. They're actually quite hard to find. Here is, where did I put it? There it is. Here is a 2-pocket mag pouch holding 2 25-round mags, which is rarely issue. You'd think it'd be kind of weird to only have 2 mags, but you could have a few of these. They're very thin, very light. There are so many Uzi pouches. I was going to bring them all out for you, and I realized I could cover the whole tab. There are a plethora of pouches for these, so that might be it for a different video if it's really of interest. The reason is, it wasn't just the IDF that adopted the Uzi. Oh, no. It was very popular. It was used by over 90 nations, over 26 militaries, and it was made in over 7 factories around the world, under license or otherwise. Probably one of the earliest adopters of note was West Germany, who in 1959 adopted it as the MP2. Now, to be fair, this was before the MP5, but most people are surprised that West Germany used the Uzi rather than the MP5 in the military, the Bundeswehr. But they did, and they actually used them well through the time of unification in the 90s. A lot of them would have the wood stock. Some of them would have the underfolding metal. FN would produce these under license, both for Belgian use and to sell. They would be produced in South Africa by Littleton, today, well, for a time known as Vector, now, yeah. They would be produced not under license in China by various state factories, and so on and so forth. And again, like I said, with 90 different nations using them, they're just all over the place. A lot of police agencies did, and of course, quite famously, the Secret Service was using these in the 70s and early 80s during the attempt on President Reagan's life. And there's, of course, all that famous stuff. I think a lot of people think that photo was of a mini Uzi, but actually it was of a full size. Just they're reasonably compact. They are heavy, but they're compact. So this is a very successful design for its day and time. Like I said, probably about the most successful. It's because it was very modern. Instead of having a machined receiver or even a stamped tube, we have a very modern, for the time, bent and welded stamped receiver upper, stamped lower. So very modern manufacturing techniques. Internally, there's not a lot to it. The military full auto would just have a massive bolt with a fixed firing pin. Of course, the civilian semi-auto is a little more convoluted. Even the trigger group wasn't terribly complex. So these things just worked, and that's why they were so popular, and they were relatively affordable. And IMI, who produced these, was able to produce them in large enough numbers to meet demand. And it really became a great source of revenue for Israel throughout the 60s and 70s. That's why everyone knows the Uzi today. It just became iconic. The full-sized Uzi submachine gun was definitely very successful. However, it was a design with its roots back in the late 40s and early 50s, and really had not been updated or modernized since then. So by the 1970s, it was starting to seem large, heavy, and just dated in general. Newer designs, which honestly were some, for example, the Ingram Mac 10 and Mac 11, even inspired by the Uzi. Others, such as the HK MP5 and MP5K, not so much inspired by, but later more modern developments. So it was starting to look a little long in the tooth, plus you're starting to see so-called submachine guns based on assault rifles like the Colt Car-15, the XM177 series, or HK's HK-53, firing a full power cartridge, 5.56 NATO. Russia also introduced the AKS-74U in the late 70s. Not willing to give up, IMI developed this gun here, the Mini Uzi. Work would begin around 1979, and these would start to appear early teasers 1980 and officially be introduced in 1981. This is, by that standards of that day and time, an updated, modernized, well, Uzi. The biggest difference is this new pattern of stock. This is pretty much the only style that IMI made. It's a side folding stock. There's no really release button, it's tension. It's a new style. It allows for a longer length of pull. It also allows for a cheek weld here. It's lighter, easier to manufacture, and just a lot more usable. It's a very improved stock. To go along with it, we've pretty much made everything mini. The receiver, they shortened by about an inch on each end, so about 2 to 2.5 inches overall. Sometimes you might say 3, so 2 to 3 inches. But what's interesting, they didn't just lob off room in the front or in the back, they cut it off equally, front and back. This was good because it kept the point of balance right at the pistol grip. This really annulled a lot of weight. This thing doesn't feel as heavy as it still is. To go along with the short receiver, of course, we had to go to a shorter top cover. We had to go to a slightly shortened and redesigned lower housing, especially in the back here because of the new stock style. We went to a shorter handguard. And of course, Most importantly, for weight savings, we went to a shorter, more compact bolt inside. To go along with this, we have a shorter barrel. Of course, it's a little shorter internally because of the shorter receiver, and it's shorter in the front. Word shorter a lot. Rather than being 10 inches standard, this is about 7.8, just under 8 inches. All in all, on paper, the Mini doesn't seem that much smaller and lighter than the full size, but when you actually hold one in person, it feels much better, much lighter. So where they took the length and the weight off, they took it off where it counted. One other difference, we went to a new pattern of sling swivel. We have small studs here that rotate 360 degrees, and we used a few different styles of sling. That also helps save a little weight. I really like these slings, by the way. They're very wide, but they're very lightweight, and they're simple but effective. And there's a few different patterns of these. So IMI would introduce the Mini Uzi in the early 80s, and while it never achieved the fame of its full-size parent, it was still quite successful. The IDF would purchase them. Estonia and Romania have purchased them. And they were made illegally in Croatia after the fall of Yugoslavia. So they've still been around. They still have made these. These are still very, very successful. But, you know, not a patch on the original, of course. But this was their attempt to keep the design update. Now this has the longer 32 round mag I talked about. It also has a bayonet lug, which is interesting because you can't actually mount a bayonet to it. The lug is too short and the barrel doesn't stick out far enough. So this is more of a de facto accessory lug. They've made foregrips and things, light mounts, weaver rails. So it's more of a mounting point for devices on these. It's kind of interesting, I thought. I really do like this stock. It's a very, very good folding stock. You just kind of torque it like that, and then you pinch your hand like that. See, it's a very compact little gun. Here's another mag pouch. This one is actually Danish, I believe. It holds 2 mags, 232s. Kind of interesting. It's made of an interesting, very thick material. Well, that gets us to this gun here. The current Uzi Pro. So even today, the Uzi is still going, at least to some extent. We'll need to backtrack though. This is a good way to segue into the semi-autos, and we have other videos on those, so I'm not going to go too heavily in this one. This is more of the military. But initially in the 70s, there was a push to have a semi-auto version of the Uzi in the US, and Uzi Gal was reluctant, but eventually was brought on board. There's a whole drama there. Let's just say the original Model A was designed by Uzi Gal and then put into production by IMI. It attained ATF approval and started to come in 1980 and 1981 timeframe. The original Model A's would be imported until 1983 and then be replaced by the Model B's until the assault weapons import ban by Bush in '89. The Uzi would be specifically targeted. Now the A and B carbines were semi-auto only versions, closed bolt of the full size. They would have 16-inch barrels. They would have a blocking bar in the receiver, so a full auto bolt couldn't be dropped in. The lower was also modified. And of all things, the restrictor ring for the barrel was modified for some reason. And the ratcheting device, as you saw my of them when they were over there, was deleted from the top cover being a closed bolt. Although I wish kind of they'd kept it just because it's neat. Anyway, they made some changes, appeased the ATF. They were made in Israel, brought over. They would have a paint finish, underfolding stock. Really, there's only a couple of differences between A and B models. The B would have the Mini Uzi style, and I guess I didn't mention those, I apologize. Rear sights, which unlike the See? A are clearly adjustable with a tool. So the Model B would feature the mini adjustable rear sights. It would also feature an out-of-battery safety to make the closed bolt operation a little safer. Interestingly, this out-of-battery safety would be carried over to later closed bolt select fire guns that IMI was manufacturing primarily for law enforcement users. Anyway, so a little extra safety on the B there. There are rumors that aren't true about the Bs being more difficult to convert to full auto than the As. This is bumkus. They're equal as far as that goes. The Bs had a few minor little tweaks, changes. The A's would only be imported in 9mm. The Bs would come in originally in 9, but again around 1986 they would start to do a 45 version. They would also offer the 41 Action Express as a chambering, which obviously is not really relevant today, but it was something IMI was pushing very heavily. For completeness' sake, speaking of the minis, they would import beginning in 1987, running through again the ban in 89. They would only bring in a few hundred to 1,000 or so of the minis, so pretty small. Full sizes, it's harder to say. I've seen numbers of 10, 15,000, maybe even more. They did quite large numbers of the full size, at least compared to the minis. They're actually very successful, more so than I think anyone really anticipated. So that gets us to this gun here, well, rather its predecessor. In 1984, IMI introduced the Uzi Pistol, which was a very compacted version of the Uzi with a 4.5-inch barrel, no stock, and a very compact receiver and a compacted bolt. Heck, they even compacted the barrel nut. Honestly, these didn't sell very well. They were big and heavy as pistols. They still surprisingly had a lot of muzzle flip, especially in the 45 chambering, which they offered them in. But they were a thing, and actually they would import these until around 1993. They would hang around quite a long time because they weren't affected by the 89 ban. So you can actually still find pre-ban Israeli-made IMI pistols for reasonable money, at least comparatively speaking. The reason I bring up the Uzi pistol here is it would lead to the micro Uzi. Some users, seeing the mini there, or excuse me, the pistol, wanted a select fire version. The Uzi pistol, of course, being just semi-auto. The micro Uzi would be a development. They would essentially install a modified mini stock. They would extend the barrel out to 4.8 inches to add the ports, the compensating ports on the barrel towards the muzzle to help control recoil and full auto. And these would be sold as kind of a PDW gun. With the stock and with the compensated barrel, they were controllable, but they had an insane rate of fire. They were insanely fast, even when fired from a closed bolt, which was an option. In fact, I think most of the micros were closed, if I'm not mistaken. But that was where the micro came from. It actually was an evolution of the civilian semi-auto gun. Kind of interesting. Well, the assault weapons ban in '94 kind of put an end to the importing of the Uzi pistols, and they weren't that great of a seller anyway. Well, in 2000, IMI would turn into IWI, and they would keep the old micro design around, and they would update it to the Uzi Pro you see here. This kind of goes along with their Galil Ace series. This really is just an Uzi pistol with modernizations, and of course now that we can have these folding braces. The Uzi Pro Full Auto Select Fire has been offered for a number of years now. Honestly, I didn't look up the date they introduced them, but it's been a few years. It's a modern PDW type gun. It would still have about a 5-inch barrel compensated. Rail on the top here. The top cover is actually pretty similar to standard, but now we have a left side cocking handle. We also have a bottom rail The military version would have a foregrip, at least as an option. Still have pretty standard sights. This one has a notch instead of a peep because it's a pistol, but you can also have a peep on the Pro. And to help reduce weight, we have a polymer lower and polymer grip, more importantly. Kind of again, like I said, what they've done with the Galil Ace. Same idea there. I really do like the polymer grip because it allows for a more ergonomic grip and also a slimmer grip. They've also gone away from the release down here to more of a Browning style up here. Large button, it's reversible. This is one of the compact 20 round mags. They developed these in the 80s for the Uzi Pistol and Micro Uzi for concealment because it barely hangs out. It's worth pointing out that these newer mags will fit in older guns, but older guns can't take the newer mags because of the different mag catch. We still have a grip safety, although it's a little curvier, more ergonomic. Same with the selector. Of course, safe and semi only on this one, but full auto up here. They've made it a little bigger and more ergonomic. The military stock would fold to the side, same as this. And it's basically patterned on the, there we go, it's stiff. The same mini style hinge we've been using. I know I was going to hit a finger there. Now the military one would be adjustable for length of pull because in 2017, 2018, everything has to be adjustable for length of pull. So they have updated, modernized the stock. And so that's how the Uzi Pro is a direct outgrowth of the Micro Uzi, which is an outgrowth of the original Uzi Pistol introduced in 1984, which was just a compact version of the full-size, kind of a conglomeration of full-size and mini. It's interesting to me that they brought the Uzi Pistol out before they brought the mini Carbine out. So while most militaries have long since retired their Uzis, including the IDF, the line has received a little bit of a second life, a second breath of life with the Uzi Pro. It's a pretty limited niche item, but it's a good little PDW. And is definitely keeping the system around and is still in production today. And this is a true, authentic Israeli-made product, which is quite nice. After so many years of not having a true Israeli gun, it is good to see them again. Well, that's a little bit of a brief history of the Uzi. There's a lot more. And for more on the semi-autos, we have various other videos, including on the Uzi Pro. We also are going to have some comparing vectors to originals, so on and so forth. So if you're interested in that, please check that out. If you like the video, please click like. Also, feel free to leave a comment. We really like to talk about things in the comment section. And if you'd like to help support us, please check out the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha. We appreciate you tuning in with us today. And please do again next time for another, hopefully, at least halfway interesting video. We'll catch you then.